Okay, we are live. Welcome to the subcommittee of the Budget and Finance Committee. This is the Nonprofit Funding Process Working Group, just to make sure we have enough parts in that name. It is Wednesday, September 25th. This is our third meeting, and I appreciate the folks that are here. We have a few more who are coming, and we'll save all the important stuff for when they get there. I would like to request a couple of additions to the agenda, which was published. I have asked Erica Burnett from the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee to join us and just speak about this process from the applicant standpoint. So hopefully she is finding her way up here. So if there's, that's my one request to add to the agenda. Does anybody else have any other agenda additions that they would like to add? Okay. And then also just to review our goal, we were formed in response to what sometimes gets referred to as the Hunger Games that happened during the budget process. I mean, not that I don't think that it's that vicious, but I do think it is disorderly. And so our goal is to create an open, transparent process to provide a clear path for nonprofits who provide services that Metro needs, and the nonprofits can do a better job than Metro can. So we are not tasked with finding more ways for Metro to give away money because our resources are limited. But if there are things that Metro needs to do, and there are nonprofits that can do it better than our departments can, we want to ensure that there's an orderly, transparent process to connect those people. And to figure out how to get that into the department budget at the appropriate time. And then have that time frame work with the nonprofits' time frame in an orderly way. And I know, Jason, you've got some experience working with nonprofits, so you can bring some, but the information that I've gotten mostly is the most important thing is predictability and repeatability. So that if we can get something put in place that will last beyond our terms so that the nonprofits know at this time of year this is always going to happen, then that's the input that I have received that would make the timeline work. It's not as critical to say if you didn't do this in January, you missed it, but just that if you know what our time frame is going to be, then you can make your process work around that. And that the resources that we have tapped so far are the finance office staff, and we welcome Jane Dozier here. We're excited, especially given your area of specialty, so that'll be a good resource for us to have. And then also Mary Jo with her experience with the CARES Act and the ARPA funding allocation process. So she's been through how the council committee did that. We don't have any represented today, but there are several departments that do give grants on a regular basis, specifically Anna Huryanan from NASA in the library has a very well-developed process in place that builds on Metro's grant process, which actually does exist. And Jane, we may give you a minute to talk about that in a second, because it's out there and it explains how it ought to be done, but I'm not sure it's always being followed by every department. So in just a second, Jane, I would love to give you a minute to kind of comment on that. And we have had some input from, I can't remember who else has spoken, but we did give Anna a place on our agenda just to kind of talk through how she has seen it work well, both in terms of evaluating applicants on the front end and providing support for those that don't necessarily have the capacity to provide the accountability that's needed on the back end. And that's a problem that we have seen sometimes with our willy-nilly, they made such a great case in our budget hearing that the council members are persuaded to give them money without really knowing what department's going to be watching. Yeah. And sometimes even it's so willy-nilly that they don't know who to go to ask money and the entire year passes and the funding never happens anyway, even though we put it in the budget. So we know we can do this better, and some of that's just getting some things put in place. So that's kind of the history of where we are on that one. And I'm trying to look at what we said was going to be the official agenda. The update on departments that give grants, again, I will say in the past, I don't know that y'all have heard this, there were two. There was the direct appropriation process, which is just the mayor's office puts things in the special allocations part of the budget. And they are specifically listed, and those entities are given that amount of money to do with what they will. And Jane, you may be able to comment on whether through that direct appropriations process, if they're even subject to the same requirements in terms of, okay, good to know. Good to know. And then there's also been what's been called the Community Benefits Fund or the Community Partnership Fund. It sort of changes from mayor to mayor, and that's where they just have made a pot of money available to several departments and said, y'all are the experts. It's been health, social services, juvenile court, and said, you've got $250,000, find organizations that do things that we need done, and then left it to those departments to create that process. What we saw, I think maybe this goes back 2 or 3 years now, is a very great case being made in terms of violence interruption. The council allocated $1 million, and we have yet to figure out how to spend it. And it ultimately has wandered over to the health department, which makes sense. That's a good place for it, but the health department is still building the capacity to understand how they can best do that. So that's kind of another example of something good, something that needs to happen. It's probably something, if Metro is trying to broaden our definition of public safety to include, welcome. We haven't gotten to you yet, so you're good. Eric Burnett, we're so glad you're here. And that's a parking pass for you to get you out of there. So I'm just giving some background, Erica, that I think you have from our conversation together.
Wonderful.
Anyway, in fact, I had just gotten to the violence interruption funding that has been available, but we're still struggling with figuring out the best way to divide that up, allocate it, and then provide accountability. So that is one of the reasons that I invited Erica to join us, just to sort of talk about what things look like from her point of view. But since we've got Jane here, I would love to give you just a second to walk us through how the process works at its best, and if you, in your 6 months, have seen issues that maybe this council process can improve upon, or what the council should mess with and what we shouldn't mess with. It ain't broke, don't fix it kind of stuff, or whatever. But I know you haven't have you watched the budget process? Did you get here in time for that?
Yes.
So you've seen that piece of it.
I've seen that piece of it.
Okay.
Yes. So I think you gave a really good introduction of it.
Great.
The grants that are given out, those direct appropriations that the mayor sets in the budget, council can, you have to approve that through your substitute ordinance. And then you have the community partnership funds that you were talking about, where the department is given a small budget, say $200,000, $250,000, and they go out and find nonprofits that can do it better, or bridge the gap that they can't provide that resource. Juvenile court is a good one. Office of Family Safety is another one. And basically that process, the department finds the nonprofit, they go through an application process, grading, evaluation, and the department sets those requirements how they want to determine who they're going to give those funding opportunities to. Once that's made, they work with their legal representative to put together a contract. Sometimes the things that I've seen, the timing, that takes sometimes a good chunk of time. And then once you've got your contract in place, they can start billing against it. And then there's special requirements throughout. We have our grants nonprofit manual that they can follow that talks them through how to set up their accounting system, the requirements. And my office is responsible specifically for the monitoring. So we'll go in on the back end a year after they've closed out their grants, and we'll make sure that they follow the appropriate terms with their goals and objectives that they had outlined in their plan. Did they meet those? Do they have the documentation to support that? Did they do what we had intended for them to do with the funding? And did they follow the regulations where the costs allowable, and eligible? So that's kind of a really quick snapshot of what my department does. We don't necessarily administrate anything on the front end. We don't work with the departments. They have that process. They own that themselves. What we do is the monitoring and the compliance of those regulations after the fact. And then we have the nonprofit manual. I think maybe you're making reference to a lot of our nonprofits maybe don't know that it's out there.
Right. Where is it?
It's on our website.
On the finance website?
It is. And so as we're meeting, I've been here 6 months, short time for those who just walked in. We've seen a lot of confusion, honestly, sometimes on the nonprofits, not knowing what those requirements are, where to go, and who to ask. So trying to bridge that gap, one thing our department wants to do is to have some training that will be open to those nonprofits to come in, ask questions, and give them kind of a snapshot of what our monitoring reviews look like on the back end.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of a short synopsis of it. I don't know if you have any specific questions I can try and answer.
Can you talk about when there's an RFP process and if it ever works some other way other than an RFP process?
So from what we're looking at, we're looking at just the grants that are given out. I'm not familiar with the RFP process from what I'm looking at in my department. That I believe would be on the procurement side. But I know the departments would have like an evaluation criteria,
right?
Kind of an open notice. We've got this funding. Come give us your plan. And then through the evaluation criteria, they would award those grant funds to a specific nonprofit, right, and then work with them to get the contract.
And I know that when we had Anna here, she was very organized in terms of the rubric that she had set up, and I think the nonprofit manual refers to that type of process. I'm not sure that every department maybe is as disciplined about.
Right. Right. Exactly. They may have different ways of evaluating, but yes, in the manual that there are references to that.
Gotcha. Okay, have an evaluation process. Any questions on sort of how we see it working so far?
Do we know what departments have those community partnership funds?
Yes, right now it's juvenile court, Office of Family Safety. I believe health has a little bit, and then of course library is a little different. They have their NAWSA program that you spoke about earlier, Miss Allen. So really those two, juvenile court and Office of Family Safety, are pretty much the last two departments.
Okay.
Right.
Do you know how much we allocated last year in the budget?
It's typically been about a $1 million chunk that gets divided up, $250,000.
Yes, usually it's about $200,000 to $250,000. And then the departments can use that. I don't believe there's a limit. We've seen some where they would award funding for $80,000 out of that $250,000 chunk, or they may spread it among other nonprofits, $10,000 here, $5,000 there, as they see necessary in the department.
Gotcha.
Are those dollars, I don't know the real words, are those dollars subjected to the 23.5 or 24%? The language that's been given to us is that goes back to the city. I don't know what that really means, but there's in our contracts, there is a line item that says the body that is serving as the admin, so the source and distribution point for these dollars, essentially has the right to retain up to 24% of the cost to offset fill in the blank of whatever that means. I think I love clarification on the direct allocation versus the community partnership funds, where or how that 24% is factored in. And then on the back side of that, other than it being extremely problematic, is there a way to clarify exactly what those funds are being used for, even at the department level? Because it's almost like this game of hot potato of it's 24%, but we don't really know what happens to it, but it's not yours.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding what she's asking.
Yeah.
So this is say the juvenile court has $250,000. You're saying they're allowed to keep 24% of that $250,000?
What's in a contract that I've seen is that in our individual contract as a CBO that's receiving funds, my experience has only been through, I think it's been a blend. It was the rec allocation from a budget, but then it's sourced through the Department of Health. In our contract, it states that the body that is administering these funds can retain up to 24% of those dollars. So I just want to specify that it was per the allocation, maybe not what is actually in that full fund for that individual department.
So that may have been a part of that specific contract, and Councilmember Porterfield, you look like you know something about that. We're glad you're here.
So, and my apologies, I was tardy. I had to get my daughter from school. It is my understanding that an entity is able to retain part of the allocation for like administrative fees. So, and I didn't know that percentage. So it is my understanding, let's say that we say we want to give X amount of money to an organization. We don't give it directly to the organization. We give it to a department to oversee it. And then that department then allocates that fund to the nonprofit. So it is my understanding that the department can retain part of that for administrative fees. Now, administratively what that looks like is what I'm not sure of, but there is some. It's my understanding that there may be some reporting that has to be done through the department, and they are kind of covering the extra labor that they have to do in order to allocate the funds. But that is something we could get clarity on from probably Mary Jo Wiggins or Kristen Wilcox or somebody.
And I don't know if you've met Jane Dozier.
Hi.
Who is from the finance department, and she is
from finance,
6
okay.
months into the grant management process. So
Oh, okay. So then maybe you're the person. Sorry.
Well, I wish I was. I'm not familiar with that specifically. I know Mary Jo will be here. Maybe she's more familiar with that. But yes, I don't know if that's specific to that specific contract, or I'm not familiar with that.
So I will share, and this is just for context. It doesn't mean it is right, wrong, or indifferent. What has been communicated to us time and time again is that this is a Metro thing. This is not specific to this contract. It is not just the health department. And at least according to my contacts of the health department, they don't see those dollars. So to your point of how it's supposed to be, the intention behind that clause, there's a big disconnect there. And so I'm sure, as you can tell, then organizations on the other side of those dollars have major questions, especially when the person who's supposed to be the administrator for that is also saying, we don't really know. 24% is a big chunk of dollars.
So Metro would like to say, just to make sure I'm following, I'm just using that 250,000 one. So they take out 24% and the rest gets sent to Department of Health, and then they issue the grants. Is that what you're saying?
From Department of Health, what's communicated is that let's say, I need solid numbers, 100,000 comes to the Department of Health that they can distribute. Either some of this was direct allocation, or it may be a community partnership fund, right? From there, once it's in the Department of Health's hands, now there is an opportunity for 24% of that total to be retained internally. And then
By the department.
By the department. That is what the contract says. And because I've been in a position where our organization or this body of funding has moved internal to Metro, there's a difference in how people are approaching that language in the contract.
So what I would recommend is that we get clarity around that. I mean, one, is really important for us to do the work that we do, that we have clarity. It's important that recipients have that clarity, but also the general public who may be watching us right now. Yeah. We just want to make sure that we're not, I don't want to put anything out that is incorrect. So I want to make sure that we just get clarity on it, and then we can speak to it at our next meeting to kind of close the loop.
A question, not a statement. So can we task you with finding out about that?
No, I'll take it back. And your specific contract is with the Department of Health?
Correct.
Great.
The other piece, may I add something here?
Yes,
Is that
you may.
okay? Regardless of, what the actual logistics are around the 24%, if it's 2%, right? What does feel important is that we understand the intended purpose of those dollars, so that we can also hold the individual department accountable as a partner in that. And so if it truly is an admin fee, most nonprofits understand what an admin fee does. That is a hefty admin fee. But if that is truly an admin fee, then what does that come with? It's more than you just being a pass-through, which the intention behind, I believe, in leveraging these individual departments for this work with CBOs should be to build a tighter web of support for and with community. And so if that 24% is being used in that way, then there are some different expectations we should have of those partners at the table.
Yeah.
Since we're using your deal as an example, can we get a copy of that contract that she's referring to? So when we're talking about it?
It's public.
It's public, so
I mean, it's probably on the finance website at this.
can you send us a copy of that?
So this would be a contract with Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee. It was initiated, though, through the mayor's office, our last contract, and then it moved over to the health department after the Office of Community Safety was disbanded.
This is this wandering $1 million that we're trying to find the home for. So that may be part of the issue. So totally well-intentioned, but we have not, I think, defined the process well enough for it to have flowed as smoothly as it could, so hopefully that it can. So, Erica, thank you for jumping right in there. I was interested, particularly to hear in very general terms, not necessarily focusing on that one, but I'm glad you brought those issues up. You and I talked about some things like maybe providing the possibility for umbrella organizations to enable the smaller nonprofits to be able to negotiate some of the harder accounting issues that are required and things like that. So I think several of the things you and I talked about was predictability and dependability and then providing accountability mechanisms for the smaller nonprofits that sometimes have difficulty. So if you can sort of give us the viewpoint from the nonprofit and the foundation side of what does it look like to y'all when y'all are hoping to facilitate Metro doing things we need to do and connecting us with nonprofits to know how to do that well in terms, and again, what I said before you got here, but you and I had this in our conversation, is just ensuring there is an orderly process for nonprofits connecting with departments. You talked about the importance of relationships as well, so for things. So that when we get down to creating our budget in June, we have put all the pieces in place that stuff can begin to happen efficiently.
Yes.
Which is not always the case, I think.
Right, so there's a lot of different entry points here. So
Okay.
at any point, feel free to interject, and we can move in a direction that makes more sense. I think what would be helpful is for me to just provide a little bit of level setting. So when I took over the village last year in August, the funds were still coming directly out of the mayor's office because of just the way that structurally was designed. There were flaws in that system. There was some lack of some accountability and systems in place, et cetera. Fast forward a year later, I talked and shook all the bushes that I could to make sure that we can continue to have some dollars to operate going into this fiscal year. We did the best of our due diligence. We actually received an allocation from city council, et cetera. Our contract ended the end of June with now Metro Health. We will not see dollars probably until January.
Okay.
The only reason that the village will be able to continue to do the work, which, to give you just a bigger picture of this, out of the Office of Community Safety, aside from the dollars that went to the Urban League to support some workforce development, the village was the largest single sort of body to receive funding out of that office. And in turn, we support almost every other organization that was also historically funded out of the Office of Community Safety. We are also housed at the Community Foundation, right? And so we just have a different support, a different network that we're able to stand on. When the transition happened from the mayor's office to the health department for this entire body of work, at least 2, maybe 3 organizations that were funded had to stop their programming. 2 of them actually had to lay off individuals who are staff members. One of them had to cancel programming for their next programmatic cycle, and at least one other program, there was a significant delay, and they needed to pivot their funding or their programming because of this funding lapse. And that was what I would call the best case scenario. Now I just don't get reimbursed for a little while. I have to wait for another 3 months when I was expecting a check today. This current round that we're in, we will not see dollars until next year. And that was because, as you all sort of walk through this community partnership funds that go directly to the department versus the direct allocation through the budget, still required an RFP process from the Department of Health and just all of the timeline. So as a community-based organization, we put our time, energy, and resources to rally the best folks that we could rally to better understand our cause and the way we are impacting the work of the city. We received solid yeses and all the votes that we needed. And that's not me, that's you, Joe. I was like, gosh. Got a yes, got a budget number, and still will be waiting until next year to be able to execute programming. Now, the contract will still be 12 months, and we can move the work forward. If we were not housed at the Community Foundation, this would not be our story. And as a matter of fact, at least, I told you, I cannot wait for the case study, y'all. At least 2 or 3 organizations opted not to apply for the RFP through the health department because the requirements were so rigorous. It was unrealistic for them. So we were then put in a position, we being the Community Foundation, were put in a position of how can we advocate? We asked very early on, with as humble of a spirit as we can, give us the money and let us do all the heavy lifting for all of these other organizations that we have built trust with, that actually see us as an ally, that know that some of the reason we got to push as hard as we could is, let's be honest, because we have a Hal Cato that's our CEO, right? Like it does not fall on deaf ears there. A couple of those organizations said we just can't figure it out, right? Some organizations said on principle, I'm not doing this. I'm not spending $10,000 on audit because I did receive $50,000 last year, and now it pushed me over the threshold, right? And now per the grants manual, I need an audit. The system itself does not match the intended impact of the dollars. And it is actually more taxing on behalf of the individuals who are doing the work. I had one executive director tell me very directly, if I continue to move in this way, then they're going to expect me to move in this way. And that's just not fair. It's not fair to the population that I serve. It's not fair to my staff. It's not fair that I'm dropping everything I'm doing to jump because you decided that this, what seems to be, you decided overnight that this should be the process now. So I use that anecdotally to poke holes in this process very intentionally. One, the reimbursement process is extremely taxing. These are organizations that don't have the budget. And so what you're expecting us to do is to go out, do the good work of community, and then wait for a check that we're hopeful may come if somebody sitting in an office that has not invested the 24% of their budget in really building a relationship with us is going to be the ultimate person to make the decision. That's number one. The opportunity there is that philanthropy foundation partners locally understand this and are saying, if government meets us and we're having real conversations, we will stand in the actual reimbursement gap. They're saying, if you're allocating $500,000, we'll front the first $100,000 so that they can do the work, and we'll work that on our end. The problem is we've not had clear pathways of communication. The honest truth is, he sits in those rooms, I sit in those rooms, and they say, we trust you and we trust community. Government has not been a good partner with us. They've not been willing to come to the table and work through these really difficult things together enough for us to have buy-in and trust that these processes won't fall, to the wayside. So
that's a predictability issue, right?
It is a predictability issue, and it's a timing. Programming is dynamic. And we are talking about folks who are on the ground doing real work. It is difficult to stop and say, let me map out my next 9 months to see if I could get enough money to do the work today in hopes I'm going to get the check right later on. It's just not fair. Another piece of this is the actual volley and engagement with the departments. A lot of our work was sitting with these community leaders and thinking through, does this positioning within the health department or with juvenile court or with the Office of Family, does it serve you? Does it serve the work of this organization? And if so, where is the mutual investment in this true relationship? Because to the point of how do we position folks for these community partnership funds, so maybe we eliminate some of the red tape, they have to be in proximity to those departments already. They have to already have relationships. I have been working my butt off to build relationships with folks who have closed doors, right, at the Department of Health right now. Let's just be very honest. And we've been able to bulldoze a couple of those doors down because of contracts, and so I need to be in this room. But if there's no carrot in some of these instances to do the work of building the relationships, then it doesn't matter if we build a model that should work. And that's where I asked the question around where's the consistency across expectations and how the departments are even working with community organizations.
And if that's our goal, is to create that, because we know it's not there.
I think that's the point. I think we see that ain't there.
Yeah.
And one other thing I wanted to add to that too, or two things actually. When we started having these conversations about having some of these work groups, part of the desire to do this nonprofit work group was that for nonprofits, the process can be very confusing as to how to get money from the budget. And if there are plenty of nonprofits that are doing great work that could benefit from getting money from the budget, and they're doing the work on behalf of the city, like work
Yes.
that the city is not capable of doing, but they don't know how to like tap in and get to those funds because maybe they don't know a council member to talk to see if they're a council member to talk to see if there could be a budget amendment, or they don't know the budget chair, they don't know the mayor's office. So we wanted to make this process like more, well, my desire, I can only speak for myself, was to make this process more equitable so that any nonprofit that's doing good work in the city that aligns with what our vision is for when we give money would be able to like access that. I think it's also important to name that I don't, again, can only speak for myself, I don't think that there should be this intent that any organization is getting like this long-term funding from the city, right? Like if an org is doing, let's say, violence interruption is a great one. If people are doing violence interruption, that is something that we as a city may not be able to provide, so that is something that we likely need to fund. If there are other services that a different nonprofit is providing, and they're like relying on city funding like for year after year after year after year after year, at some point, like I think there needs to be a conversation of like, is what they're doing, it could be great, but to what level are they serving the city? Do we need to keep funding this? And I think that that's kind of some clarity around what we wanted to figure out with guidelines as well is when does it make sense for us to give money to a nonprofit or fund a nonprofit, and when does it not make sense? And then the last thing that I want to say that also can become a barrier is that some of the work that is done does not match with the expectations of like government officials. And like if you're out in the community and you're doing violence interruption, your language may be off-putting to a council member, right? We as council members don't necessarily understand everything that's happening in communities when people are in the midst of this problem and they are trying to solve this problem, or they are offering supports for these problems. Like as government, like our hands are clean. We're not standing in the midst of two people with guns out, right? So
we have to trust the process.
And we have to trust that the people that are doing this know what they're doing, especially if they're able to provide like data and they're able to provide, they're able to be accountable and to show, these are the statistics, this is the progress that we've made, but we have to understand that may not always look like the way that we want it to look like, and the people may not be dressed the way that we would be dressed, and they may not use language the way that we would use language, but they're putting their lives on the line to save kids. And we're helping kids in a different way, and it's all valuable, but we have to figure out how to work together on it.
And I think our starting point for that is clearly laying out what the end goal is, and having metrics that are clearly explained, again, going back to, I think you missed this part at the beginning, Anna Harikanan from NASA did a great job of just explaining their very well organized RFP process. They have a rubric that, that shows, what is needed and what they know will be good for kids and after-school programs, because that's what they do best. And they've also got, very specific accountability measures on the back end. And so if we say, we're not messing with your means and methods, but, here's the data we want to see at the end. How many kids did you reach? And did they, do this productive thing as opposed to, ending up in Judge Callaway's court? So I think if we do a good job, frankly, of letting the departments under, with input from us, do a good job of describing what the end results need to be, and that is spelled out on the front end, then that's what guides the process. And some of that exists already in the nonprofit manual, which is on the finance department, and in the process of, digging around in this, I finally stumbled across that and went, oh, this is pretty good. It tells a lot of things that ought to happen, but in watching how some things have happened, it seems apparent that just some communication or training or whatever, as we've talked about, could hopefully get people more in line on the front end, just in terms of that.
Two things pretty quickly. So one, that goes back to our notion of, are there other organizations, Community Foundation, rightfully so, I'm a little biased, that can stand in the gap for these orgs, right, financially. You don't have to pay the $10,000 for the audit. By the way, the village was paying for the audits, right? Like, so it's this circle of madness a little bit, but we were the ones paying for the audit so that the orgs could individually, right, collectively receive the dollars. Is there a umbrella organization that not only could be the fiscal agent, but could also support the meeting those deliverables? How do we position you for long-term success with a government level contract, even if it's not today, but for the next time? That's one thing. The second part is, and I know Councilperson Evans would mind me sharing, because she said this over and over again, we had a chance to spend time together as a part of the Violence Prevention Action Team, which is part of NACHO, and we were in Colorado together, and she inquired directly to me, well, how would I know? How will my other council members, how do we know if a program is successful? How do we know that this is the impact? And she referenced very directly my program and saying, a previous point of contact, we had no idea what was going on. So how will we know? And in the spirit of relationship building, I flipped the question and said, how will you learn? How are we setting up the right mechanisms that, as sort of the rotating bodies of those elected officials who are responsible for governing this process, how are we also intentionally building in opportunities for you to learn about the work that's happening? We also have to remember that there's a very real power dynamic here, not only with numbers, but also positional power and volume and capacity. And so we can't put the earnest always on the person who is out there doing the work. We need to really partner and collaborate to make sure that the process that we're building is equitable in itself, not just the outcome. And equity means, are you making time in your agenda and inviting folks to the table so that they can share? And does it feel like an opportunity to collaborate as opposed to I'm reporting out to you about something? There are very real nuances to how we're able to show up and be with people that bring them into this type of conversation and helps to sort of streamline the process along the way.
So you would say, in addition to, I think it is important to have a central spot under finance, probably where the nonprofit manual is, also where the results, of last year's funding is. In addition to that, also having the ability to report back to the appropriate committees that are funding those.
Absolutely, and I think beyond appropriate committees, I mean, the different caucuses, right? So that in subgroups that this body as a whole, the governing body as a whole, is able to see and better understand the impact, so that it's not just the one-off conversations either. Because regardless, we're still relying on an individual's capital to be able to really push into the space. So the more we can try to level set that and bring the collective into some shared capital, and build those pieces into our process, then I think it helps to eliminate some of the tension around a timeline. A timeline is a timeline is a timeline. We get it. Folks understand we're not irrational and illogical in our thinking. It's a matter of what other considerations went into that timeline in the process.
That makes sense. Mary Jo, thank you for
Sorry, I was
coming.
late.
I know you're probably running from meeting to meeting, but I appreciate your perspective, and we're going to have our next meeting focused specifically on, I'm jumping out of order here for just a second, the Nashville Needs Fund, because we are going to have an opportunity to get to proactively create a process where the council, in theory, is getting over $1 million as a result of the stadium deal that can be given to nonprofits. And we do not want to create another willy-nilly process where we, with good intentions, say we want that to go to this, this need without knowing what department's watching it and what the criteria are, so that the nonprofits know exactly what their objectives are. So that, I want that to be the specific focus of next time, because that's kind of starting from scratch. But within the framework of what we're talking about here, which is kind of more in line with the community partnership funds, and then also, as you mentioned, no, I think it was Kristen mentioned in an email to me, there are also departments that get a lot of grants from, other federal and state and other nonprofits throughout the year, not on our budget timeline.
Right.
Where they still are saying, this needs to happen, we're going to get this grant, and some of it's going to a nonprofit for something to happen. So that's kind of a side shoot.
Yeah, you have two different, taking Nashville Needs out of it, you have two different kind of timeframes. You have one that I think collectively folks have decided it would be helpful to have a more understood and consistent process for applications. We already have a platform for that, we just don't really have a time frame around it. Then you also have something that we can't plan the time. We don't know that, Office of Homeless Services isn't going to get a federal grant at some point during the year, and they're going to want to partner with some nonprofits. So how do nonprofits know about that? Because we don't have to do an RFP. Doesn't mean we can't, but we're not required to do an RFP for those types of grants. And then, of course, Nashville Needs Fund probably falls more into that first.
Because it will need to
bucket.
fit in the budget cycle.
It will have
So
to fit in the budget cycle.
We're just going to have to do a little bit of extra.
Yeah.
So I don't really want to address that one
That's okay.
this week, but just in
I
terms.
think it won't be much different than what we've said, and I appreciate you touching on it too. It's the relationship with the departments.
Mm-hmm.
Because just like Chair Porterfield said too, that we've got, if we know those relationships, then if those relationships are being worked on, then the needs that the city can't meet, if there's something of a service that Metro can't provide, we want that nonprofit providing it. Mm-hmm. And in the follow-up and reporting, how was the program successful? That should be part of those departments' metrics. I mean, and there isn't anything wrong with direct appropriations that are just kind of what we call in the admin, but I'll give a real example that I'm still working on from this budget, is that the Women's Caucus, and we've talked about this, so I'm not, really promoted, and it was in the substitute budget of a childcare study. Mm-hmm. And so, but because that ended up in direct appropriations, it's still sitting, it's not been under contract yet. The funds were intended for United Way. They are the ones that requested the funds because they had a study that the women's, but what would have, in hindsight, what would have worked out a little smoother is if they had partnered with MAC. Because MAC's really our local expert on that. They're the subject matter expert that can make sure how the study gets, planned, reported, formulated, followed up on, the reporting. So when it sits in direct appropriations, there's not really an owner. There's not really a subject matter expert that can guide that process and report back. So I just can't emphasize enough the importance of that partnership with the departments so that there is that connectivity, because it should be boosting then. It should actually supplement something that MAC needs when they're looking at all of the different childcare providers.
Yeah.
Can you go one level deeper for me, please? Because I understand logistically what you're sharing. What then is the philosophical intention or barrier from then giving that money that is sitting in purgatory right now to United Way directly? Is it that
It's more the logistics. There's not a philosophical issue as much as logistically, it just, because there wasn't a department that initiated that, it was the Women's Caucus. MAC's all on board, but didn't know about it until kind of after the fact. So when a department, so let me see if I can answer the question better. When the community partnership funds, so we have 3 departments that get $200,000 each. Those are in the department budget, in the budget. So once that budget's approved at the end of June, July 1st, they start like they already know those are it's their money. It's going to further the work that they do in their department. So they do that RFP, they get those nonprofits applications, and they're starting to secure those. Like I've been signing off on those grant contracts now. They come to council, so y'all seem to. But so it's an intentionality and a bit of an ownership and accountability, because they want to see that work done. Just like MAC wants to see this childcare study, but they weren't engaged at the front end.
So we're playing catch up.
so? It's what's the words that I learned? The source and distribution. Are those the words that is that the issue? That now the money is there, you need to find the department partner, and that's the logistical challenge.
And that shouldn't be happening after the fact. That should be happening at the front end. Like if we would have actually put that money in MAC's budget, because once the Women's Caucus decided, yes, this is what we want to support, then United Way could have worked with MAC to say, or Women's Caucus could have worked with MAC, or all 3 on board. Again, it's that relationship to say, we're going to put this in your budget. Instead of putting it in the admin budget, which to the general public or to a nonprofit, that means nothing. But it just makes it
There's somebody who knows what they're doing.
So it's the distribution part.
Right.
It has to go through a department at some point.
It works much better.
It doesn't have to, but it works better.
And
And I think that's the fuzzy language, right? It's because, and great example, there's Raphael Institute. Part of the village was funded through that Office of Community Safety. Travis was like, no thank you, and has found a different source, right, to be able to draw down those dollars. What we hear is it's a lot easier or it makes it more complicated, but no one's talking about what that actual process is.
So we have a current portal where a nonprofit could apply, but if they just applied and it was like, we think we have a great service to provide the city, it would kind of sit there without anybody really grabbing it. But if they talked to the department, developed that relationship, and then that department would say, yes, that's a budget modification we would like in the next budget. We would like this work to be done. It either supplements our work, it's the foundation for our work, it's work we can't get to, they can do it more efficiently, then that department is bringing that request.
In my humble opinion, that's the part we need to change. Because for a small nonprofit, if they don't know the system, I get building a relationship.
Yeah.
But you don't always know who that person is. And
Right.
any large funder has an orientation or this is how you do it, and this is where you go to find that information. We've got to make that information easier.
I have direct a question to Mary Jo.
Yeah.
Ms. Wiggins. So help me to understand, because now I'm hearing what you're saying, and what you're saying, I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. And then you say something, I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. So I think where the struggle to understand a little bit is, so the money is supposed to go to United Way, but right now it's in an admin account. I get how it makes it better for MAC to own it. What is the barrier right now from us cutting a $200,000 check to MAC? I'm sorry, to United Way.
We just have to get the contract. And I'm working on it now, but it's one of those things where it wasn't naturally in place.
Okay.
So United Way reached out to me, and I think the only reason they reached out to me is because I've was working with them on some art funds. So they were like, hey, how do we get a contract? And I was like, oh, that's not art funds, like, that's not for me to get that under contract. So it was kind of like, who owns that?
I understand what you're saying
Who's
now.
gonna do the contracting with them? Who's gonna kind of monitor
Who's gonna do the
program?
contracting? Those are real words that are helpful. Okay,
Yeah.
so who's gonna do the contracting?
Yes.
That's the
Who's
big
gonna
issue. And
monitor
that's,
it?
that's where.
Who's gonna be responsible for the
Accountability,
reporting?
yeah.
That-
And you don't really want that to be finance. Like, people think, oh, well, you guys deal with numbers, but you want a subject matter expert.
Yes, that makes
Jane's
sense.
team comes in and does contract reviews and monitors after the fact to make sure that if they said they were gonna serve 700 families, they served 700 families. If they were gonna serve families in this geographic area, that the families were, so finance has a team that will come in and do compliance and monitoring, but as far as like true, like, deciding the scope of work, like, that's the biggest
And
piece.
the
is
accountability
what's the
measures.
scope of work?
Right, and
What
the
do you-
quality, was it?
Yeah.
That is very helpful. That makes a lot of sense, and I think that's
So I
a
think-
lot clearer than what we kind of heard. And I think it's helpful for council members to hear this, because so speaking from budget chair and as past budget chair, you could probably attest to this too. What happens with us is like we're in work sessions or we're looking at wish lists, and a well-meaning council member, and it happens all the time, a well-meaning council member says this department needs more money for this, or this nonprofit needs this, and they've had no conversation with the department. There's no, and I've had department heads reach out to me to say, thank you for this extra money, what was it for? Because the council member did not do the due diligence. They're asking for something that the department itself didn't want, didn't have the capacity to deal with, or had no idea was on the table. So I think that is helpful for us as we go into that budget process, so that council members understand if you're advocating for something, like, there needs to be things put in place before you get to the point of asking for money in the budget.
And to make it effective, because even if the nonprofit was fully capable of doing what they had talked to the council member, and it was a, $100,000 grant, we just don't want it to be in isolation. It should be connected to some other work that it, that it supplements or it should have a grounding and a liftoff, not just, oh, well, this was a great work and it was one time, and so glad you got a grant this year, you may not next year, and it doesn't build on anything.
So I want to do two things. I'm going to spend some time brainstorming on what, and that's why I've been speaking in terms of timeline, is how do we spell out somewhere where it's easily found, this is the time that nonprofits should be building relationships, this is when you should be contacting. It has to be in a department's budget request by January, except for these other funny grants that get awarded to Metro at other times of the year, but we're not talking about that right now. But if you want to be in the budget, then you need to, so I want to lay out that timeline. Before I do that, I want to welcome our visitor and ask you your name so I can acknowledge you're here and what group you're listening for.
Hi, my name is Sultana Dukoya. Sorry I'm late, by the way. I came from class. But I just wanted to listen in because this is kind of what we're studying in class. We're studying U.S. state governments.
Okay. Awesome. Glad you're here. I'm going to, you'll correct my spelling later because I know I got it totally wrong. So what I would like to spend, and I don't intend for this to be a super long meeting, so let's say maybe if we can take another 15 or 20 minutes this week to talk through, I think, what a logical timeline is and what communication is necessary so that departments and council members, I think, are the two key entities, know how this process should be working. And then I would like to discuss the possibility of meeting the third Wednesday of the month or the same time next month in October, to kind of finish up whatever we don't finish up here, and then also talk specifically to the Nashville Needs Fund process, because we don't know what departments that's going to hit, and we may want to loop in some that have no idea that we're looking at them. So that's a little bit of a different discussion. So let's talk through, in a perfect world, with input from people who will be applying for these things, what if Metro is going to say, here's our timeline, working backwards from, we know our budget's going to be finalized at the end of June. And there may be this time to tweak things in May, but it would be really better if you were talking to departments in from July through December, basically, I think. And building those relationships nonstop, but specifically talking about what you're interested in.
I think it needs its own tab on, Nashville.gov. I think, Nashville.gov, I think a lot of the things on there are hard to find. I mean, so you're saying the nonprofit manual's on the finance tab?
Yeah,
He would go to they might would, but, that's not where I would go. I would be typing in nonprofit, but I think it needs its own little
yeah.
tab. It's such a big thing.
We organize things by departments, and nobody knows what department does what.
Does what?
So that's a bigger problem. But I do agree that, take for example, a small nonprofit that doesn't fall into any of the buckets that we talked about. Selfishly, I'm going to talk about Neighbor to Neighbor for a second. I'm a former board member of Neighbor to Neighbor. We went through this process painstakingly past 3 years, where we basically get down on our knees and beg the mayor for money every single year. Now, 2 of the past mayors, not including this one, thank God, thank you, Mayor O'Connell, did not award us anything. And with Budget Chair Allen and Budget Chair Roten, they made that happen. Actually, no, I'm sorry. Budget Chair Porterfield got us what they got this year. So actually, we've never really had help from the mayor.
But you've had 3 council members on their knees for you.
Yeah,
Budget chairs.
but you shouldn't have to know somebody on council to advocate for the holes that you're trying to fill for Metro, is my point. That's a little backwards to me.
Yeah, but, okay, I understand that. I'm just thinking out loud here. But then somebody has to go and figure out what they're doing, so we know to vote for them or to beg for them.
Hold that thought.
Okay,
Let's continue a little bit farther down the where to locate the information
Okay.
question, because I think that's an important one.
It is.
And I think, I am all about having as many entry points as possible and then linking to a central spot, which, for sure, I think it does make sense to have the nonprofit manual under finance. But I only found it after, I've been talking about this for 5 or 6 years now, and I just found this nonprofit manual recently. So where else would people be looking that to be honest, right now, you can go to Hub Nashville, and there's a not that hard to find link that says, I want to apply for a Metro grant, I think, or something like that. Mary Jo, can you remind me where?
It's on the hub link.
Yeah, it's a hub link, and if you put in the right words, you will find it there. But I don't know.
That's one of those, like you said, if you do that.
Nobody's reviewing.
Yeah, it's just sort of floating out there in space unless someone knows to go grab it. Okay.
Oh,
You
yeah.
have to select, but you also,
Not everybody's gonna know what department.
right.
Yeah.
That's the first step. Like, that's almost, and I'm not saying it does. I was in nonprofit for years and years. I'm not saying that that's gonna necessarily trigger that thought for the nonprofit, but it should. It should be like, hey, a department is my foot in the door. It shouldn't have to be a council member. It helps, right?
Yeah.
But the department should be the foot in the door to say, we could do some really good work together. Like, I can fulfill a gap that you as a department can't fill. So let's work together on this, and it becomes mutually beneficial. Because we know there's not just hundreds, there's thousands of nonprofits doing good work, but Metro's not here to really be a funder.
Right.
Metro's here to provide the services that the city needs to provide. And when a nonprofit can fill that, perfect.
Yeah.
We know there's more work that nonprofits are doing that's great. It's just that it's not the city's responsibility to fund that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And thank you so much for saying that, Mary Jo. And I think that that's where people sometimes get confused, and they think that we are here to be a funder, but that is not the intent. It should be
I wish
when
we
a
could.
nonprofit.
We just don't have enough.
Right, we just don't have enough money to do it. Like, we want to raise everybody's taxes to the point that people can't afford to live here, then we can fund all the nonprofits. But I think that we need to make it clear what does it mean that a nonprofit is doing the work that Metro. A nonprofit is standing in the gap and doing the work that Metro can't do, right? Because that's the case when we will fund a nonprofit. But what does that mean? So that nonprofits will know when they kind of quote unquote qualify to get that funded. And also, I think we should have some type of like checklist or FAQs or some type of sheet so that when they do go and they click that link and they say, well, I want to apply, step 1, reach out to a department, to give them the walkthrough of what they need to do. before they apply for funding so that they can have a better opportunity of being successful through this process.
So right now on the Hub website, usually there are, there's that sort of blank box or drop-down menu of I want to do these 3 things, and then there, you can read these articles, which I never read, but maybe that's the place to put an FAQ right there.
Yeah.
So if we've got an FAQ with all that kind of stuff, and I'm not sure who's going to write it, but we'll think about that. Then in theory, there's a place that says, here's how you find out what you need to know. Again, right now we know that on finance, under grants or nonprofit or something, there is a place where you can find this, and under Hub, there's a place where you can find it. Are there other places where we should locate it where people could be driven again to the same spots?
Yeah.
I think under the council budget,
Yeah.
on the council webpage, under budget, and then also maybe under like the office of neighborhoods or something like that, or the office of community, whatever that name of that office is, like wherever people would naturally go to look for community resources.
Yeah, and Nashville.gov does have a search feature that we should pretty easily be able to tag things to make it findable. But yeah, it should be on every department that is applicable for funding. This should be there right in front of you so that you can click it. I was diving through the finance website, and I'll be honest, I gave up.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So that's maybe it's just a matter of creating more links.
Yeah.
Okay, and now, again, because we've got someone who applies to these things in the room.
Yeah.
If we have enough places where you can get driven to those 2 places, is that a reasonable starting point?
It's a point. If you were to ask us, rank your top 10 needs that you want the folks to flex their intellectual property for, it's not going to be that.
Yeah.
That list, absolutely. But just directing me to a link to, I'm sure, what took a lot of time and effort in that manual is still very, very, very confusing.
And it's
Community Foundation we hired a great writer, not just because we had the money to, but because it was just, the process was very complicated.
Right, and then, so, again, let's talk about the umbrella organization piece, because at least we now have sort of a 2-tier process where if you're small enough, then you don't have to do a total audit.
It's financial compilation, and then there's a review. There's different tiers.
There's different
whereas
tiers.
You don't
So
have
we
to
have
do the
hopefully made it
It's a combination of the size of the organization and the size of the grant.
of the grant.
Because you can be a small organization, but if you're going to get a big grant, you still need that audit.
That accountability. So we've made that distinction. I think the request that I'm hearing here is it possible to allow an umbrella organization to speak for a collection of smaller organizations? And I'm guessing the answer is if you're applying for the same grant, then that would work fine. I'm looking at Jane.
We use fiscal agents.
Yeah.
We can use a fiscal agent.
Okay. So that's
Many
possible.
organizations do.
Yeah. Okay.
So we were told no.
Yeah, but they have not specifically been a fiscal agent. We've had various
For
ones.
us, but
Yeah, but CFMT is, CFMT has been a fiscal agent on a couple of our ARP funded grants, and we get, I'm trying to think of another example that we did. I think y'all did our VOAD. I think
Yes.
CFMT did the VOAD.
We have been a fiscal agent for that. So I think this is where process needs to be clarified, and there needs to be some consistency, because we were told very directly, no, over and over again when asked about Community Foundation serving as a fiscal agent.
So ensuring that all departments are singing off the same page.
Yes.
Gotcha.
I think the difference would be, and I don't know what specific questions were asked that you got the no's, I still think it would be the nonprofit that needs to probably, I don't know if the question was, well, can we apply for grants and then subcontract?
What's the answer to that question?
Because that
Would be a no.
would be different than being the fiscal agent for someone. That's being more of an umbrella organization, and then you're doing it's almost like when we do when we use a fiscal agent, it's usually because the work of this nonprofit has been either requested or approved, and then all of a sudden we're like, oh, but you don't have, your audit and probably can't in time, so let's get you a fiscal agent who will be responsible.
So that would
for that
be, that is, if you distill down all the other fluff, like that, ultimately that is what we ask, and we were told no repeatedly. So if that is what is acceptable, as opposed to re-granting out dollars, but that sort of the scope of work has been curated in a way that is inclusive of the various entities that are participating, that is very different than what is being communicated right now, at least through the Department of Health.
Okay, let's finish timeline, and then maybe talk about the communication piece, just to, again, to assure that departments, you had mentioned maybe doing some training, Jane, and I'm guessing that's training of the departments in terms of how they are handling grants, so.
Yes, for departments and for nonprofits.
Gotcha, both, okay.
Both.
Because it sounds like we've identified a need on both sides, which is very helpful. Okay, so we started with where to locate, and I think we've said 3 places, finance hub, and then on the council site, and if we think of other places that make sense, to me, maybe Metro Social Services page would, I don't know, as many places as where community resources often are dispensed from, to me seems like another.
Did you say you couldn't find it when you typed in nashville.gov? Did you type in nonprofit manual?
Well, yeah, to be clear, that's because Nashville.gov is awful.
Yeah,
Mainly.
well,
It's not really anything outside
I mean,
of
if
that.
you can't find it, what do you think a
Right.
nonprofit's gonna do?
We're gonna ask
Yeah.
IT if they will help us make that search work better. So that's where to
Yeah.
locate.
Their
And-
search words need a lot of help on a lot of things.
Yeah.
That's nicely. And then in terms of timeline,
Carolyn, can I add one note?
Sure.
I do think it's worth, as a part of where it's located, what additional pieces of information are being shared at that point of
right,
contact.
so
as
like
well.
adding the FAQ, yeah. That seems like a really important idea.
Yeah, 100%.
So we got that on there. We have not assigned who's gonna write up that FAQ. Any volunteers?
I can work with finance. Is that okay if we work together to write it? And then what I would love to do is to get input from you as someone who's experienced it, so that we can all kind of make sure that it's helpful for user-friendly and helpful for you all, but also giving the right information.
Yeah.
And I would maybe throw in Anna Harutyanan, just sort of as the other side, as a department that does this really well.
Perfect.
Because I think she's got it down to a science.
Is that Anna what, Naza?
Anna, yeah, with Naza Harutyanan.
Yeah.
It's a mouthful. And then we're, again, working backwards from the budget. I mean, to me, maybe this is not that complicated, doesn't need to be spelled out, but to me, the timeline is between July and December is a good time looking ahead for nonprofits to be developing relationships with, finding out who the departments are as the first step, and then developing relationships with departments or council members in departments or whatever, but ultimately departments. But
So there's no set deadline when they have to have something
well, you have to
submitted
work
now?
backwards from, the deadline is we finalize our budget at the end of July. So if we work backwards, at the end of June. End of June. And so we do, at the beginning of June is when we have the public hearing, and we hear things that didn't make it into the budget. It is better to make it into the budget.
Right.
So back up to that, when the
Would be
mayor
May.
puts his budget together
May
at the beginning
1.
of May, but that's based on department hearings, which he has from like February through March or April. So
Ideally, it needs to be.
Be that
so
before
the
that.
departments need to have been made aware, we can do this for you. We would love for you to try to create a grant process so that we can do, because you need to do it and you can't do it very well. So that, I'm working backwards to, the departments need to know they need you by February when they start meeting with the mayor, is what I'm thinking. And again, predictability is so important. We talked about the time lag and how difficult that creates, but perhaps there are umbrella organizations that can deal with that. But again, if if the process is not predictable, that's also a problem. So I don't know if it's possible to talk in terms of more than 1-year grants. Can we only do grants that exist for a year? Or can we do a 2 or 3 year grant from a department? Can a department do that? Or since
From a
they,
budget perspective, I don't know that we have any examples because you
had the annual budget, not a 3-year budget. So that's hard to ask. Okay, I just thought I would ask.
I guess, so technically, I'm just thinking out loud here, I guess technically a department, if we go down this road of, structuring it as such, they could work out a deal if it's a part of their budget, yeah, we really like the work that you're doing and we'll renew you every year. And I mean, but then that gets a little messy, but then that'll be between the department and the nonprofit.
They're at the mercy of the council.
Right,
Of
right.
whether we actually give them the budget to do that.
Right, exactly.
Well, I thought she said there was 3 that got it every year, a certain
Yeah, that's
dollar
what-
amount.
3 that are in the charter. So that's
Yeah, that's
Humane Symphony and
Science is interesting.
okay.
And that's because that's the charter.
Right, that's the charter.
Not
right.
the council.
Yeah.
So I don't know that that's that earth-shaking to say. Our suggestion is just that by January, the nonprofits have made their abilities known to departments.
Maybe like January 15th,
Can we
mid-January.
give them a point of contact within each store? Like, we know how to get in touch with departments, but if you tell the average person to contact the health department, how are they gonna get to the right person? I know that's kind of a moving target because staff changes and all that.
I think that could be in
that's the very
maybe
question
in the
I'm asking.
FAQ. I mean, maybe that's a part of the FAQ.
Is there a designated person in each department that answers those questions when they come in and they submit it? They have to be using some emails that are just a department email.
Oh, the hub link currently?
Yeah.
It just lists the department and then the hub team will forward it to the department.
And if you're lucky, somebody at that department will look at it, or it may sit there forever. So if you haven't developed a relationship so that you can say,
be a big
this
barrier.
is coming, please look for it, it will languish. That's where we are today.
And I'm really uncomfortable with like the language of developing a relationship because I think it puts the onus, to your point, of like the nonprofit, like I think our intent is that the nonprofit reaches out to the department to say, hey, I could do this service for you, let's have a conversation. I think we don't want to put, which I think is fair, but we don't want to put on the nonprofit, like, what happens if that department is just like shutting the door in their face or like not willing to have a meeting with them or not willing to engage in a conversation? How do we make sure that the nonprofits aren't just like spinning their wheels with entities that maybe aren't wanting to work with them? I just want to be careful that we are not putting too much of a burden on the small nonprofit that may not have the manpower to keep kissing folks' butt till they get a meeting.
Right.
Not that that's our intent, but
Well, it sort of goes back to that's who's answering the nonprofit submittals for each department, because that's really who they need to be getting to if that's where it's going. And then that person needs to have accountability.
Well, but it sort of comes back around to our starting point of, what is the mission of each that they can't do, and how do they, and what nonprofits can do that better than they can.
I'd also
And
offer-
we can't fund every single
Oh, no, no doubt.
nonprofit. So
Yeah.
we don't want to create the expectation that all you have to do is apply to Metro and you get money.
right.
Because number one, you have to meet a need that Metro needs and can't do better than you can.
Maybe that needs to be spelled out wherever they go.
That's
and
right at the top of it, yeah.
In the FAQ.
Yeah.
I know, Richard.
I agree 100%, Councilmember Porterfield. But it's kind of standard mentality in the nonprofit world. If you're going after funding, you better get to know the funder.
Yeah.
I guess, well, your point though is, you got that one person that just does not like your nonprofit for whatever reason. Maybe you worked in the space before and you got a grudge against them. It'd be nice if there was, I don't know if it's like an appeals
committee.
process or a committee or something like that. Yeah, just so nothing like that slips through the cracks.
Yeah.
Can I speak to that
Yeah.
really quickly? There have been significant people as barriers in this work.
Yeah.
And even when an organization is in transition, like the health department, and as big and as massive as the health department, in spirit, we know that this work belongs at the health department. The work of violence reduction in our city, the work of intervention with young people, that work needs to live at the health department, even if the health department doesn't know it yet, right? Like, that is what community believes to be true.
Yeah.
When there is a person on the other side of that table that is not aligned with the work of community, nor do they prioritize the value that CBOs can bring in relation to the larger vision of that department,
Yeah.
that is the barrier.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you can't
That is
change.
the barrier.
I mean, you can't change somebody's mentality. Either a passion, to me, with nonprofits and stuff and helping the community, I believe people are either compassionate about it or they're over here and they don't really give it
I
time
would
of
say,
day.
from a process standpoint, we can't build personalities into the process.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I think that's where council members come in. I mean,
And-
if
and
working through
systems.
the process, yeah, if working through the department process is coming up with an unrealistic and unjustifiable barrier, I think that's where council members come in.
I don't want to necessarily put more on your plates, but somebody said, could there be a committee? As part of the budget process, that would be interesting to say, like, okay, well, we had 32 applications on the portal. What happened to them all? Where did they go? Did they get
I'll volunteer.
considered?
Yeah, no.
I don't know, that's an interesting, that's kind of the first time I thought about that, if it's gonna be part of the budget process, to make sure that somebody didn't just get the door slammed on them and stymied.
Honestly, I think this
Maybe we ought
could
to be that
originally, I think this
committee
is.
this year and follow it
To kind of serve as
This is
the,
a
Yeah.
committee
Well,
this year and serve it
And
through.
Yeah.
not to get ahead, but you're probably gonna need something like that when it becomes the Nashville Needs Fund.
So maybe this will be the model
Then
for
you're
that.
gonna have, you really are going to have dedicated funds that the council's going to have
Yeah.
a bit of a process, a responsibility over that process.
yeah.
I think that's the
And-
way it was.
That's an excellent point. In theory, every department has been trained now by Jane, and they will have.
There will be.
Okay, we know, they will all be trained, and they will all have goals and objectives and metrics and rubrics that we can look at and say, you know, this came through, it looks to me like this organization met all those rubrics. Department, can you explain why this isn't moving forward? I mean,
And if
that.
there's a nonprofit we need to go understand and learn about, we go do that work.
Yeah. Okay, so I have just created this committee, which Jeff is gonna.
I think one note that I would add here, because there are deep relationships that have been built, and there are I've heard about this portal. I have no idea where it lives. I don't know what the
Hub
buttons
Nashville.
are. Right? It's some. However, if there is a standard process that even if you do have a relationship with the person in charge who is saying yes, that there is still a paper trail
Yeah.
that can be
Followed.
Yeah.
followed and compared with the other pool. It doesn't mean, that whatever strings are going to be fine, but that there's still a paper trail.
Exactly.
Because there has been, whether it was intended or not, a feeling of a game of keep away, right? And so I think the best thing to do is try to pull back the veil,
Yeah.
even where we didn't even know that the veil existed. And so bringing everyone aligned with the process would be really helpful.
Yeah. So, and interestingly, I mean, just because of the nature of our budget process, what we said is nonprofits reach out to departments to match needs and abilities at the first half of the fiscal year, essentially. And then in January, the departments have said, yes, we need this, I'm gonna put this much money in my budget, or, the mayor always gives me $250,000, and I hope you apply for this because you seem like a good match or whatever, but departments will proceed to meet with the mayor and say, this much needs to be in my department budget because I intend to do these things. And then the budget comes out in May, and then the council looks at it and says, and that's different from grant money, because we know the grant money never shows up in the budget. Because we always, when we talked about each department, they will have holes that are not there, and they say, well, we always get this grant, but we can't put it into our budget because it's grant money. Am I saying that right, Mary Jo?
I don't know the answer to that.
I mean, I know that when we.
I don't know
when
that
we-
I've heard it phrased that way, but that could be true.
That's
Can I confirm or
That's the
deny?
way I'm understanding it, because we will see things that we know certain departments always do, but they're not showing it in their budget because that grant hasn't been awarded yet, and they can't include it in their budget until they get the grant, but they know they're gonna get the grant.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a different animal. Metro is assigning this money to this department to do this.
Oh, grant funds from
Like state grant funds or
oh,
federal grant
yes,
funds.
sorry, correct.
So I'm saying that, so those don't show up in the budget, that's a different animal. This is if Metro is gonna provide money. And so it's not until the budget passes that the departments can then go back to the nonprofits and say, we are funded, let's start this process. And I don't know how long it will take to necessarily do that. What's the fastest we could do that process?
Depending on the departments. I
Yeah,
mean,
what's the fastest you've seen a department do it?
Our juvenile court was very good this year. I think they were ahead of the game. Like you said, they were right on the target. They had
They
their.
were so ahead of the game, I
Yeah.
asked if they had actually done an
Right,
RFP. 'Cause
right.
that's-
Which one was this?
Juvenile court.
Okay.
And I think social service, somebody else, anyway, I think juvenile court was first, yeah.
Okay.
Some of it depends too, remember if the nonprofit is named in the grant, in the budget?
Which Delisha did, and those were within some departments.
Again, for example, not to harp on this one, it's just because I'm currently sending emails about it today.
United Way.
United Way wasn't named. It said childcare study.
Uh-huh,
Well, that means that contract has to come back to council.
right.
If it had said United Way childcare study, then you all already approved it and you don't have to see it again. And that contract would have gotten out faster.
Interesting.
I think that's good. Yeah, that's good to
But-
know.
There's an advantage to both. You may, as a council member or as a department, may say, hey, we really need some help in this. And so you may, the department may request funds to partner with a nonprofit, but not know who they're gonna partner with yet. Or not know the exact dollar amounts for the different partners. Like they might want, 400,000, but they need 3 partners and they don't know exactly how they're gonna divvy that up yet. So that's why it might say, some kind of coalition for 400,000 and not name them. That could be an advantage at that time. But if you know who it's gonna be, name them.
Name them.
Name them.
Okay, so I'm gonna say in mid-June, we're gonna pass the budget with some nonprofits named in department budgets and some departments allocated funding to be determined.
Like the community partnership
Yeah.
funds.
Allocated.
Can I ask one question?
Yes, ma'am.
The village, was the village named specifically in the budget the budget we just passed?
I don't know.
You say no? Okay.
That's why we had to do an RFP with Metro Health and why we won't have dollars until it's happening.
I think where I'm getting confused is that when Bunny went to the health department and the health department gave us a list of grantees and the village was named in that list.
Yeah.
But because it was named as a list under the grantee list, but it was not named in the budget ordinance.
Correct.
That is why they had to do the RFP.
Yes.
You're right.
Okay.
And they
Because
have been very clear with us in explaining that part, so I did know that information, yes.
So will all of those have to be an RFP process by definition?
Okay,
Okay.
my next question.
Okay, so
So if they're
maybe-
named, they don't have to do RFP.
But if they're not named, do they have to do an RFP? That was my question.
Yeah.
Okay.
When,
All right, I sense that we are close to being done. So let's say we are close to our timeline. Can we meet again a month from now? Same time, same place.
Which day?
It's the third, it's like October.
Is it the 23rd?
It's the 23rd.
Okay, so that's 40.
I could do the,
I'll be out of town.
All right, does the week before that work better?
Sorry.
Yeah, I know.
Those 2 weeks are, I'm just out.
Is that spring break or something?
Fall break.
Yeah.
fall break is
I'm
the
not going
week of
nowhere.
October the 9th. The week of October 7th. Okay, y'all are out of town just on the Wednesday or like,
I'm out the whole week of the 14th and 21st.
oh, okay. What about
following
the
week?
30th? Is that too far out?
I don't think so. 30th, October 30th?
I'm fine. I'm starting a new job where it's going to make 2 p.m. meetings very hard. So
Okay.
I don't know if that's an option.
Does it need to be 2 or would 3 work?
Doesn't matter to me.
Is 3 any better?
Oh, I can make 3 work.
Okay, let's make it 3.
I can't do 3.
Can someone else pick up your daughter?
Well, it's not that. It's getting her to bowling practice.
No.
Is that every day?
We'll just say, no, but it is on Wednesdays. It's okay, we'll make it work.
Okay. All right, October
About
30th.
2:30, split the baby.
Split the baby.
Could you make 2:30 work?
We'll see. We'll see. I
Do
don't.
we
I
move to
don't-
Tuesday?
Huh?
He said, or can we move it to Tuesday, October 29th?
Do you have bowling on the
I'm
Tuesday?
free. I'm good on that Tuesday.
All right, October 29 at 3?
I might have a problem, but that's okay.
I don't know, I don't have my
What
calendar.
if we tentatively schedule it in this moment, since it's a month out, we have time to
Yeah.
notice it, so we don't have to be firm today.
Okay. Well, I want to thank
So what's
everyone
our
who came.
tentative date?
I want to thank our visitors. Fantastic
Thank you for
input. This
having
is
me.
very helpful.
I did a lot of work.
you.
I don't.
Yeah. We're doing
My
that.
email address is just
Um,
Erica at
We're adjourned. We'll kind of
CNNT.org.
pick up where we left off, but I think this is helpful.
It's ERIKA.
3 is our 10th.
29th at 3 is our tentative.
IKA.
All right, I gotta run. I gotta get her to bowling practice right now.
Hooray.
Where's your bowl?
Donaldson, Strike and Spare.
Like that?
Absolutely.
She's
I
on
see
the
it. Yep.
she's on the bowling team for MLK, and their home bowling alley is Donaldson because there's not a bowling alley out here, and we gotta get the bowling practice at 4:00.
I'm going down Lebanon Road.
Right.
Okay, all right, we have minutes.
I'm just going right
Thank you all so much for having me. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate
It's
Thanks
just
for coming
helping me
by.
hear from the other side, so.
Good to see you.
I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, did you get your parking pass
I'm
though?
leaving in the morning, so
Where
I
you
won't be
going?
there.
See y'all next week.
So my cousins.
Right.
Hey y'all, can y'all do me a favor? Can we get a big round of applause for somebody who registered to vote today?
Right,
Excellent.
okay, minutes.
I have to get absentee.
All right, glad to have you, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Come back for a council meeting.
Will do.
You're fun
You think this
too.
was fun?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I was gonna ask them if they needed a